Good evening, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to Books and Books in Coral Gables. Thank you so much for joining us here this evening. My name is Steve Moss. On behalf of everyone here, we're very happy to have you with us. While you are silencing your cell phones, please take a moment to take a look at our Books and Books newsletter. This will give you a breakdown and synopsis of all the wonderful events we have at Books and Books every night and every day of the week. A couple of note worth mentioning. Coming up in May, Greg Isles will be joining us. We've got Garrison Keeler will be joining us, Timothy Geithner, Mika and Emily Brzezinski. So any number of wonderful events. Please pick up a copy of this if you don't want to take this with you. You can always go to our website at booksandbooks.com and give us your email address. That way you don't miss a thing. We will send you plenty of emails to alert you. And while we do love to have you here in the store, you don't need to be. If you prefer to watch online, you can always call the store at the number below on the screen to ask a question of the author or order a book that we can have signed for you and shipped to you free of charge anywhere in the United States. But tonight we are very happy to welcome Dr. David Altshuler and his book, Raising Healthy Children in an Unhealthy World. Here to start the proceedings is his very special guest. Please welcome David's father, Mr. Richard Altshuler.
In the desert. Stephen Crane. In the desert I saw a creature, naked, bestial, who, squatting upon the sand, held his heart in his hands and ate of it. I said, "Is it good, friend?" "It is bitter, bitter," he answered. "But I like it because it is bitter and because it is my heart." You get one more. Michael Drayton, Since There's No Help. Since there's no help, come let us kiss and part. Nay, I have done, you get no more of me. And I am glad, yea, glad with all my heart, that I so cleanly I myself can free. Shake hands forever, cancel all our vows, and if we meet it not at any time again, be it not seen on either of our brows that we one jot of former love retain. Now, at the last gasp of love's latest breath, when his pulse failing, passion speechless lies, when hope is kneeling by his bed of death, and innocence is closing up his eyes. Now, if thou wouldst, when all have given him over, from death to life, thou mightst him yet recover. I'm looking. Thank you. I'm looking for Bruce, that I want to introduce. Bruce Turkel, where are you hiding? All right, he'll find his way up here.
Live stream. I think he's just going to be with us.
I'll wait till your husband turns around. David, are you ready? Yes, Fran Schmidt is here. There's three things you're not going to hear tonight, but if you spend time with David, you would hear them a lot. Hey, how you doing? Are you a Miami kid? Where'd you go to high school? Every one of you. See, people are nodding yes. Because every one of you who met David Altshuler on the street heard those three lines. And any of you who run with him hear them every time he spots somebody new and tries to pick them up. You see, David collects people like the rest of us collect baseball cards or blues records or fiesta ware. David is the consummate people person. So it should come as no surprise to any of us, except maybe his parents, that David has dedicated his life to making people's lives better. First as a high school math teacher, certainly as a parent and a husband, and now as one of the country's leading educational consultants. Like people, David also collects bad jokes and great stories. And he's compiled many of them, the stories that is, into his latest book, Raising Healthy Kids in an Unhealthy World. I personally think the title is the best part. Maybe David will tell you why. But David will prove he's a great story collector tonight when he reads from this book. He's already proven that he's a great people collector by the wonderful turnout of all of you wonderful people who are all his friends. I didn't see a single person walk in that David didn't know by name and couldn't give a hug and a kiss to. As far as the bad jokes, if you're really unlucky, and David's even less circumspect than I know him to be, maybe he'll tell you Lenin in Poland. It really is the worst. My good friend, David Altshuler.
It is with a certain sense of irony that I welcome you. I wrote a book on parenting. One of our running group, an older dad, asked me, I'm going to have a kid. I want to give her love and affection. I want her to grow up strong and straight. I want her to do well, but I want her to know that she is appreciated for who she is, not for what she does. You go to all the conferences, he says. You hang out with Miami's preeminent mental health professionals. You read the journals. You've worked for 35 years advising kids. Give me some advice. I said, it's my pleasure. Follow me. So here we are tonight. I want to talk about process addictions and the threats to raising healthy kids in an unhealthy world. And I want to take you back, if I may, to your grandparents' home. Stew's cooking on the stove. Smells like home. Smells like family. And the television comes on. And I want you to interrupt when you can name this tune. A kid's baseball goes through a neighbor's window. He's panicked. But his older brother's friend says, don't tell your parents. It'll be all right. How are they going to know? A+. All of you stay after class. You clap the erasers. Goes home at night. There's mom and dad, Barbara Billingsley, silk blouse, strands of pearls, wore it in a jacket at the dinner table. Not sure exactly what he did for a living. It was never clear that he ever left the house or took off his jacket. And they sit down to dinner. Jerry Mathers is nervous. Could he play nervous or what? They don't talk explicitly about religion or morality or ethics, but it's understood. And instantaneously, the beef comes clean. He says, Dad. And his dad says, all right, you're going to have to work the market a couple of months, and you're going to pay back the neighbor. Cut, print, that's a take, commercial. Contrast that, if you would, with what my 14-year-old daughter can watch without parental controls. We block everything we can. If she turned on Married with Children reruns, she could see a 15-year-old, highly sexualized young man refer to his not unfashionably overdressed older sister, 17, Christina Applegate, as she whose head can never be seen in a car. Exactly. So they got to pass the censors. Maybe they talked about necking, but that's not where your mind went, or mine either. So in a generation, my 14-year-old, who's not allowed to watch just anything, there's a contrast between the home in which your grandparents grew up, where the dangers were outside the home. I don't know all your grandparents personally, most of them, but I think of that loving home. Might have been small, Might have been in Cuba, Ireland, Russia. There might have been dirt on the floor. There might have been chickens walking through. There might have been a hole in the roof. There might have been holes in the window. There might not have been too many books. Maybe a religious text, maybe a few books. And there was danger everywhere, but outside the home. Step on a nail, you get a disease called, thank you, and you die. You take a drink from the water where the chickens have been, and you get another disease, thank you, and you die. Or the weather changes, and there's hailstones, and the crops die, and the animals die, and then the people die. There was danger everywhere. No radar. You didn't know what the weather would be. No antibiotics. But in the home, you were protected by the good smells coming from your grandma's kitchen. Today, I've been to most of your homes, and they're nicer. And there aren't holes in the windows. And there aren't chickens and dirt floors. And there's AC, and there's tile floors. And there's still a lot of love in your home. But the danger has crept in under the doors. The screens bring danger to your homes. I worked with a lovely young girl recently, 16 years old, went to a high school whose name you might recognize, and her wonderful father was concerned that she needed residential treatment. She was sad, experienced some grief and loss, acting out the least little bit. We got to chat. How many of your friends, how many of the 15-year-olds in your 10th grade class have never seen internet pornography, I asked her. Right? Because you look at your daughters with love, what are their classmates looking at them with? She looked at me, and in answer to the question, how many of my classmates have never seen internet pornography, as if to suggest the same number of my classmates, David, who have never seen a hamburger, which would be 0. Your children are under attack from lack of privacy. Think about it. If I were a guest in your home and I asked you what was line 34, adjusted gross income on your 1040, or how many times you and your wife got out to see a movie last year, I'd never be invited back. But your children are routinely asked in school, what'd you get on your SATs? Where are you applying to college? What'd you get on your math test? What sort of extracurricular behaviors are you comfortable with? As if they were a product in a supermarket. When I counsel my students to answer the question, what did you get on your SATs? I say, just look the questioner in the eye and say, are we married? And then when they say no, say, well, then we'll have to talk about something less personal. I took my older son to the emergency room recently. He doesn't particularly like it when I tell this story, but he sliced his finger open playing Wii tennis. He was 17 at the time of this story, and he may never speak to me again. Once again, follow me. So we stopped by the emergency room at 10, and by 5 the next morning, there we were on the road. I had a prescription, which I dutifully, if sleepily, filled. He said, wake me up in an hour, I got to go to school. Right. So he got up at the crack of noon, and I said, how do you feel, son? He says, Dad, my finger hurts terribly. I gave him an Advil. He woke up again at 4. I said, how you doing? He says, I'm all right. So I now have 20 OxyContin in my medicine cabinet. And I am not arguing with my dear friends in the medical profession. I knew the ER doc. Our kids went to school together. He wondered why I was staring at him for 7 hours. We finally put it together. I'm not saying anything negative, but goodness gracious sakes alive. who's working to turn my beloved son into an addict? So if anybody knows what I should do with those medications, I'd be happy to. Video gaming, needless to say, unheard of in your grandparents' house where there may or may not have been electricity. World of Warcraft has 10 million players worldwide at $15 a month. What's the expression? You do the math. PS4 has sold 380 million units. You know, I used to teach math. When I say 380 million, I don't mean 280 million or 400. 69 million subscribers. This is not to argue that you can't have a glass of wine, which my dear and wonderful friend Steve Lerman has provided for us tonight. This is not to argue that we all don't have a high-functioning adult who smokes pot now and again or looks at internet pornography or buys a lottery ticket. We all know that woman, I don't think it's the same woman, who at 15 started smoking 3 packs a day and is now 92. I'm just saying that these are not good arguments in favor of smoking cigarettes, drinking alcohol to excess, or becoming addicted to prescription narcotics. The threats to the family have come in under the door. The people who sell process addictions are pretty slick, I think. They say, we're only making cigarettes for those who choose to smoke. But if your child should choose to smoke, no one from corporate is going to fly down in a private jet and say, hey, you're not old enough. So with all these threats to your kids inside your home, you're looking for answers? Here's what I got after 35 years of counseling students, helping them choose and apply to college, working with them to find therapeutic boarding schools or residential treatment. The answer is inside your own heart. I know that sounds cliche. I almost wrote that out of the speech. I went back and forth about it. The answer's in your own heart. Stay away from, you know that woman who gave her 4-year-old daughter that party with the bounce house and the 12 Disney characters in costume, and there was a train that went around the property, and there were any number of art projects, and the only thing they didn't have was a helicopter, and people, the kid didn't want, you know her? Okay, you don't want to be her. For a child's 6-year-old birthday, you want to give everybody a wooden spoon and a pot, maybe some crowns, right? You want to look within. You want to bring up your kids with what you know is right. It's easy to fantasize about a previous generation, isn't it? It's easy to think, oh, everything was great in Grandma's house. There was no electricity in addition to no antibiotics, so there were no threats. Sure, there were threats. Like I said, Cossacks sweep in, it's an issue. Aren't we all from the same shtetl? I thought you looked familiar. Your children's interests are not being addressed by that boorish display. If there was one sentence I could share with you after 35 years of counseling, it would be, look into your hearts. You know how to bring up good kids. Stay away from the media. Stand up for them. Model appropriate behaviors for them. If you don't want them to smoke cigarettes, don't smoke cigarettes. How's that for a place to start? If you don't want them to be on the computer 24/7, you might want to pick up a book yourself. That's what got a laugh? I'm working on this speech 30 years. That's what you got? I am deeply and truly honored that you came out tonight. The reason Bruce likes the title, Raising Healthy Kids in an Unhealthy World, is because he came up with it. Thank you, Bruce. My dad, just so you'll know, and then I'll take questions, is a savant. He did a couple of poems. He can recite poetry until you've all gone to bed. Thanks for coming out. I'll take questions. Yes?
Someone has to break the ice for you. I guess my question is easier said than done. How do you protect your children from that threat under the rug, which really isn't under the door, it's coming in through the airwaves or microwaves or whatever that is?
It's an excellent question, David. Thanks for asking. My feeling is you have to be with your children, irony intended, in the Buddhist sense. You have to be with your kids. I took my boys, they just happened to be the boys, it just happened. The girls go this year, camping in Utah. And we did some primitive, we didn't see any people for a few days, and my younger son sprained his ankle. And at one point, he was looking pretty ragged, kind of a few hundred yards behind, and he was dragging the backpack and pretty miserable. But what are we going to do? We couldn't have him airlifted out. And he said the other day, he teases me unmercifully. I don't know where I got 4 snarky children. He said, first he said, you worked through dinner. I'm going to do drugs. My dear friend, he's kidding, Val. My dear friends and informed families taught me that if you have dinner with your kids, they're 4 times less likely to do drugs. So he teases me about that unmercifully. And then he corrected himself. Will says, I'm not going to do drugs because I am not going back to Utah.
You know, you talk about protecting, and this world, you know, they say it is a strength on being strong too. And sometimes we really grow from those challenges. And I see also, parents, that it's that overprotection. Are we really going to be good that I'm always going to protect those children? Because it's a fine line of always standing up, that maybe we have to teach them also to stand up for themselves.
That is such a wonderful question and a subject of ongoing, important research. The distinction that I make is fulfilling all of your children's needs and ignoring almost all of your children's wants. A crying baby must be cuddled, fed, burped, changed, cuddled, burped, changed, fed. Remember? However, I want a pony, but you live on the 13th floor on a condo in Brickell, and ponies aren't going to happen. It's a fine line between my chemistry teacher is so mean, mom marching in and with torches and a pitchfork and seeing to it that that chemistry teacher is reprimanded, fired, tarred and feathered, chastised, and saying, my kid can do this. I'm going to support her. I'm going to validate her. I'm going to listen to her. If I try to teach her chemistry, that would be child abuse. But I'm going to convey to her that in our family, you can do things. You can do this. And if you can't, I love you just the same, honey. How many of you know any chemistry? Yeah, me either. I'm going to support you. I'm going to validate you. I'm going to model for you that in our family we do the best we can. And if you get a C in chemistry, pass the mashed potatoes. Yes, sir.
You said that if you don't want your kids to smoke, maybe you shouldn't smoke. If you want them not to watch TV 24 hours a day or be on the computer, maybe you should pick up a book. I get that. But I would bet that very few of the people in this room play video games, the World of Warcraft, as you called it. How do we keep our kids off those games?
It's a wonderful question, Bruce. Thank you. I don't have all the answers. I'll just tell you what we do in my house. We close the door when we go to the bathroom. That's what we do. And we don't have video games because none of the kids makes any money. They can't buy that $200 PlayStation. So we just have a policy. So far, it seems to be working okay. It's the hardest thing in the world. Loving parents and grandparents, right? They bring the stuff in. All I can say is, are any of you old enough to remember Missile Command, where the plane would come over and then the missile, and then they would split and fracture and there'd be more and more of them? It was easier to get it one time. You got to cut the puppy dog's tail off once on Monday. You don't do an inch on Tuesday, an inch on Wednesday, and it bleeds and it's painful and it heals. One time. You got to say when they're real little, no video games. That's it. This is our house. That's our rule. I'm going to pull an old teacher's trick since I'm kind of stumped on that one and just move on to the next question, which hopefully will be easier. It's about, as the title implies, it's essays like this one about case studies, young people with whom I've had the privilege to work over the past 3.5 decades. It's, I hope, gentle and gracious advice about parenting. Yes?
I'd be interested in your thoughts on something as, I guess, an educator. One of the things that I have kind of observed through the years in this whole concept of leveling in schools. You know, when I was working my way through the school system, I was in a classroom with exceptional students and students who, you know, were not so exceptional. And when a test came out and the grades were distributed, you know, people who worked hard and were bright got the rewards of that, and others maybe not. And it just seems to me, you were talking about SAT scores and the way we accelerate things. We've started to divide students in a way where you take all those exceptional students and you put them in the same class together. And that's always concerned me, because then the A becomes the expectation, it becomes the norm. And I've always been concerned about the level of stress that's generating and the messages it's sending to the children. Do they ever appreciate that they may have an acumen that's, you know, exceptional, when exceptional becomes the norm?
My Uncle Ed called his mother not so many years ago. He said, "Mom, you know the Mackinac Island race that we do every year? This year was brutal. After 27 years, there were 12-foot seas, boats were turning back, one boat got struck by lightning, one boat sank. We were 48 hours at the tiller. My graduate students were below decks, throwing up. But Mom, this year for the first time, we won." His mother, my grandmother, God rest her soul, said, "Oh, I just read about a man who crossed the Atlantic in a 14-foot boat." It is not in the interest of your children to be told that they have to be number one, because, by definition, not everyone can be. There is something to be said, in my judgment, for a heterogeneous classroom where you can give me a hand. Maria Montessori said, "You never learn something till you teach it." I appreciate your help. Let's learn this together. There's no reason to force those kids to be someone who they're not. And again, you were kind enough to ask what the book is about. Love your kids for who they are, not what they do. Yes? I'm certainly not.
I'm a grandmother now, and my oldest granddaughter is 12, and she's received all A1As in school up until now. She's in 6th grade. That was all elementary school, so now she's in middle school. And now all of a sudden she just received her report card. She had an A and all Bs. So I said, "Oh, well, that's still very good." I said, everybody's saying, "What happened?" She says, "I hate my teachers. I hate my teachers." So I say, "Well, going on, and she would not explain. How do I help her get that out? Or is she trying to keep up with other kids? She was the smartest one in elementary school.
The definition of malpractice is to talk about a kid whom you haven't met. My feeling would be, meaning no disrespect to my wonderful wife who teaches 4th grade, or my wonderful mother who taught for 47 years, or my mother, we're all teachers, right? We got married, there were 25 people, 21 of whom had stood up in front of a classroom. My thought would be, rather than focusing on your daughter and helping her to get dog biscuits, A's, I'm sorry. You're much too young. So my thought would be to take back the night. My thought would be to take responsibility, not for focusing on the reward, but focusing on her education. If she lives close by, Books and Books is the best bookstore ever anywhere. Right? Hang a left outside this door, buy 10 copies of Percy Jackson, Harry Potter, The Forgotten Door, Island of the Blue Dolphins, The Hobbit, Charlotte's Web, cuddle up with a kid, and we're done. Yes, ma'am.
David, you talked about being with your child. Many of the families that we deal with that are poor families cannot afford to go on a wilderness trek to Utah. How do these families just be with their children?
Val, you shame me. Dr. Val, you shame me. That's so true. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me repeat it. My respected colleague points out that not everyone has the advantages that I have had. Not everyone has a father who can recite poetry. Not everyone has a mom who writes textbooks. Not everyone has a hardworking wife who allows me to go traveling, camping with the kids. What about families who are working 2 jobs just to try to keep body and soul together? It's hard choices. And all I would say is there has to be an hour every day. My dad and I used to play catch. $27 times 2 for a couple of gloves, and I would lose a baseball every 20 minutes. So what does that cost? There's got to be an hour. Take a walk with the dog. Go watch the sunset. They haven't taxed the sunset yet, to my knowledge. There's got to be an hour every day. Because, as we all know, there have to be a series of trivial conversations. Only on television do the kids come home and say, tell me a little bit about the birds and the bees and reproductive biology, and what about this love business? Okay? You gotta wait for that moment. It comes around now and again. As you know, when you have the sex talk with your kids, you want to do it in a car on I-95 going 70 miles an hour, right? Couple of reasons. You're both looking straight ahead. No eye contact. And perhaps more importantly, if you're only going 40 miles an hour, they will jump out.
So I happened to hear on NPR, so it must be true, that there was a study recently that said that children whose parents are very involved in school do worse. So,
What do you think about that?
I thought that was fascinating, and I'd love to know what you think about that, whether or not you heard this story or you know about this research, and what you think it might mean.
There was a book published recently, I forget the name of the author, that addresses this very issue, and the research seems to be clear. I'm teasing. It's my good friend Alfie Cohn's book called The Myth of the Spoiled Child. And he argues cogently and coherently, I think, that indeed parents who are more likely to be over-involved in their children's education, who are more interested perhaps in the results than the child, correlate, not saying there's a causal connection, with parents who are overly controlling. Erikson and Maslow, all the developmental theorists, talk about adolescence as a time of individuation and independence. How are we going to communicate to your children, you can do this, if we are telling them what to feel, what to think, what to eat, what to say, when to study, when to wake up? I've had parents, well-meaning, loving, decent parents in my office who say, my kid is always falling asleep after school, after rowing practice, so I have to go in and poke him so that he stays awake to do his homework. What's wrong with this picture? Everything.
I have an observation that I'd like to share, only because a lot of what I've done, and my husband Tim is out of town, otherwise he would be here too. We have 3 wonderful sons, and we were involved in every aspect of their education, keeping them busy. Their determination of being good people, I think, is a reflection of myself and my husband, and I'm going to pat myself on the back. What's worked for us may not work for anybody else, but when you have 3 children in 3 different schools and all ages from grade school to high school, one of the things that would work for us is every afternoon we would pick up the child that got out at 2:30, would wait till the child got out at 3, and the child that got out at 3:40, and we would go Monday through Friday to the library, or we would go to Books and Books, or we would go to Barnes and Nobles. And we would spend an hour and a half, Monday through Friday. They could do their homework. They could pick any book, magazine, whatever. That was their time. We would get a snack. We would sit there. We would spend at least an hour and a half. Was it time consuming? Yes. Was it educational? Absolutely. They could pick whatever they want. If you want to spend time talking to them, they would talk. They would tell you about what went on in school. If they had a problem, we were there all the time.
And I've met all 3 of your sons, and they're lovely, and they were lucky to have you as parents, and you were lucky to have them as kids. Imagine if they had come home and the following argument had started: Mom, why can't I go to one of the world's largest outdoor toilets, trample employees to death, and have access to every imaginable illicit substance? You're better off in the bookstore than you are at Bayside. Yes, Ive.
David, how are you addressing the issue of legalization of pot in the states that are having it? I mean, if you can't get away from it, it's all over the place. And all the professional talking heads are, talking about how wonderful it is, and it doesn't matter, and this and that. And you're trying to go against that grain. How are you handling that with your clients, with the kids that come to see you?
I'm again it. I'm again it. If one of my loved ones, with whom I share DNA or not, was in horrible pain, I would dress up like a 17-year-old. I mean, wouldn't be much of a stretch. And I would go down. Why do you find that amusing, Megan? And I would go down to the local high school and I would buy marijuana if that were what was medically necessary. This is a controversial subject. I write pieces on this on my blog, and I get hate mail. It's kind of interesting getting hate mail. I think on balance, right, as a culture, as a society, we have to look at the greatest good for the greatest number. I think that for every person for whom medical marijuana is life-saving, and I'm sure they exist, I think there's a whole generation of lost kids who are smoking pot, playing video games, and whose lives are qualitatively worse as a result of their addiction to marijuana. We're going to lose, though. Right? Yeah. So, yes, Ellen.
Your examples are wonderful, and I was wondering if there's a North Star, there's a generalization that you could generate. I know the one about being with your kids, I think, really hits me. Is there another way to say that for someone who doesn't perhaps get that word being? Because not all kids, I came from a family that they never knew if I did my homework. Nobody ever checked anything. It's not that they didn't care. I was very loved, but nobody ever checked anything. And for some reason, I was motivated. So children are very different, and so are parents. Not every parent really wants to be, is cut out or suited to, providing that wonderful, rich type of environment. So if there's some sort of thing that draws this all together, can you talk to that perhaps?
What a wonderful question, Ellen. And would you be embarrassed if I mentioned where we first met? You sure?
There's three of you, you've already mentioned that.
I had the extraordinary good fortune to take a class with Ellen. Was it earlier this year?
You were 15.
I
was 12. 2 years ago.
She was a precocious 12. What a wonderful way to articulate the question. I was taught when the first of my four was little that when she was fussy, we did what was called the European baby carry. And when nothing would calm her down, we would put her on my arm, and then I would cradle her to my chest. And I think there was something about the beating of my heart, and I have tried to extrapolate that now that she is 22 and less willing to cuddle with her dad. At every developmental stage, there is a way to take your child and place her skin to skin against your heart. And maybe it's chasing evil squirrels with the family dog, and maybe it's being silent together. There's always a way to connect with your kids.
Folks, we have time for one last question.
Please.
What's your position on the inoculation issue?
Vis-a-vis autism, and I am not qualified to have an opinion. I defer to my wonderful doctors, who know a great deal more. Thank you so much for coming. You guys are great. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, David. Obviously, your parents did a remarkable job as well, so thank you for that. Folks, we are going to retire to the other side of the store where there is a reception waiting for you. The books are for sale at both counters. David will sign them for you there. For those of you watching online, give us a call. We'll get a book signed for you. Thank you so much for coming.